Hello, Reedy type people. I think 5 years worth of YouTubing has finally culminated in something worthwhile. I have been given the opportunity to interview Brandon Sanderson.
Hi.
Hi Brandon, how are you?
I'm doing just fine.
So you're in the UK because you have published your new book, Shadows of Self. Do you
Yep.
want to tell my readers very briefly about it?
Well, it is the 5th book in the Mistborn series, but the second book in the second generation of Mistborn books. One of the things I wanted to do with this series is, I love epic fantasy. It's a fantastic genre. It's my favorite genre. But it has this thing where it gets very stagnant. A lot of the worlds, they don't change. You'll be in this world for 3,000 years and technology is exactly the same. And I thought, well, I want to do a series where I write an epic fantasy series and then start writing things more contemporary in the same world where the magic and the stories have become the foundation of mythology and religion in the new world. And so the magic actually stays through it. So it's kind of steampunkish a little bit in the new ones. And they're about a lawman from the Roughs who finds out he's inherited his house title. And so he has to come play politics in the big city, despite being very rough around the edges himself, and kind of interface with all these people while using his old lawman instincts for the things that are happening in the city.
But this wasn't actually your plan for the contemporary world, was it?
Well, I'm going to go there'll be another jump. I put this one in because for various reasons, but I will actually go contemporary. This is more modern. Then we'll jump forward. I'm planning another trilogy after this that will be a 1980s level spy thriller-ish, Tom Clancy-esque epic fantasy mashup that should be very fun. And then I plan to actually do a science fiction trilogy in the same world many years later.
So was this just a dalliance? You just kind of were taking a break from other
kind of yes, kind of no. What I realized is while I was working on the Stormlight Archive, my original plan had been to alternate Mistborn books, but the 1980s level ones are going to be big, thick, epic fantasy books, and I thought I would like to have something to balance out Stormlight that is a little more fast-paced, a little more intimate, so to speak, about a few characters instead of an enormous cast, just so that I'm changing it up, both for the readers and for myself. I find that as a writer I do a lot better if I have something new to work on that's very different from the project that happened before. So while I was testing that out, I tried writing a short story in the Mistborn world that would kind of be an interim piece, and the short story didn't end up working. But that's where I started planning this novel series, this sequence, and I really liked how it was feeling, and I did one book to see if fans would go along with me on it called Alloy of Law. And the reception was very good, and so that's when I jumped in and wrote Shadows of Self.
So do you consider that a standalone and this is a trilogy?
Yeah, I kind of do. I consider Alloy of Law is kind of it's less an experiment and more hey fans, do you like this? I was fond of it. I liked how it turned out. But I wanted to see what their reception was before I dove in. And then I plotted the same characters.
Were you going to leave it there then?
If the fans were like, I was going to leave it there, but then a lot of those threads that you're like, feel like they're cliffhangers, they very easily run into the next trilogy.
Yeah.
And you'll see how that happens when I do it, the threads that are running through these books.
Because I read Alloy of Law without the idea that, without the knowledge that these new books were going to continue with the same characters. I assumed everything would be wrapped up, everyone would end happily ever after.
Right.
And when I finished it was like, more now. You've experimented with the magic systems somewhat.
Yes.
So you have your Twinborn, which
yes.
I found really exciting. Would you have two kind of Twinborn abilities you choose?
Boy, I would probably pick Wax's just because that's the most interesting to me. At least initially it was. For those who aren't familiar with the series, I built Mistborn to have a wide variety of different powers, each kind of based around one thing that would help a member of a thieving crew do a better job. The original pitch for Mistborn, the epic fantasy series, is a heist novel, gang of thieves. Well, I came up with all these things, but then I gave the main characters access to each of the 16 abilities. And so when I jumped forward in time, I said, these books, again, I'm trying to be more intimate. I wanted to have characters who had fewer abilities but did more with them, just to explore further and dig deeper into the magic system. That's where the idea of the Twinborn came from, was this idea of we'll give them one elementic power, one ferrochemical power, and we'll see how the mix of those two creates something unique.
I thought you were going to say time, so you could write more.
Yeah, that would be kind of nice. That would be kind of nice. the Pharaohkami, which in the books is a magic system where you can kind of delay some of your abilities. For instance, you can be weaker for a day, and then later on you can tap that power and be twice as strong for a day or whatever. Came from me being an insomniac.
Oh, did not know.
There are times it was really hard in high school where I would be trying to go to sleep, and I would lay there all night trying to fall asleep, and then wouldn't be able to. And then in school, I'd be just exhausted and wanting nothing more than to lay down and go to sleep. And I thought, this is just backward, right? Why can't I be tired when I want to sleep and awake when I want to be awake rather than the reverse? And that eventually, over many years, seeded into this power of Pharaohkami, where people can take their wakefulness and store it up so they sleep now and pull it out later when they want to be awake. And it turned into an entire magic system.
Is that the first one you thought of then?
Yeah, that would be the very first idea that became Mistborn, was during high school, wishing I could store up my sleepiness.
I was going to ask, so did you have these separate kind of magic systems, even these separate kind of Mistborn, Stormlight story ideas before kind of going, actually these can all fit together into this one story or into the Kazmir?
So the idea for the Kazmir, a connected universe of epic fantasy stories, happened very early. I can even trace it to reading books. The Anne McCaffrey books when I was 14 were one of my favorite series. Part of what made me a reader was reading the Dragon Riders of Pern. I can remember inserting into those, in my head, a character who was interfacing with the characters in the books, who would go between books and would show up in the background, just adding this thing in my head. And that was the origin of the Kazmir, was this character behind the scenes sneaking about in other people's books. When it came time to begin work on some epic fantasy works of my own, I sat down, I wrote Elantris, but I didn't want to write a sequel to Elantris immediately because I wasn't published then. I wanted to have something else I could send to editors if they rejected Elantris but said, hey, we kind of like this. You got anything else? Yeah. Then I wanted to be able to send them something new, but I love epic fantasy. And so I wrote Elantris, and then I started writing books where I inserted one of these this hidden character who'd been popping around in my mind forever into these books to create a big kind of interconnected set of mostly Easter eggs, honestly. Yeah. It's not meant to come to the forefront for a long time, but if you read my books, you will see characters from each other's books interfering, and this is not just there is a story there. It's not just for fun. It's not just cameos, but I love that idea of the hidden epic.
So you mentioned Elantris, which you just had a 10th anniversary edition published?
Yes, yep, over in the States. It's not the 10th anniversary here yet. So that's not till next year or the year after.
I was going to say, should I read the original or should I read the 10th anniversary edition?
Well, the 10th anniversary edition has a lot of the typos fixed.
Okay.
That's part of the reasons why I had to do it. See, after I started to be successful, I was able to hire a personal editorial assistant, Peter Ahlstrom, who's a good friend of mine who is a professional editor for a manga company. And I got to hire him in, and he started just going through my books with a fine-tooth comb. He's excellent, but he didn't get my first few books because he wasn't working for me then. He was a friend reading them and giving me feedback, but he didn't have time to just find all the typos. So we handed him Elantris and said, okay, go for it. And find all the typos and all the continuity errors and clean them all up. And boy, it's so much slicker now that he's done that. So I cringe thinking of people reading the first edition because it had a lot of typos.
Well, do you feel like you'll be this way in 10 years' time with the books you're publishing now?
Maybe.
You added this in or that in?
Maybe. You always, as an artist, feel like that. We're not really changing anything in Elantris that's substantive. It's only typos and continuity errors. If you dig into what if I added this, what if I added that, then that is a dangerous, slippery slope. I've dabbled in that before, and it worries me that you just can't do that too much. You need to let the piece of art eventually just stand as the piece of art it was, rather than trying to clean it up, because you might just ruin what your vision was back then and take out some of the things that were special about it.
I was going to ask though, because you've said in various interviews that you had ideas for Mistborn, ideas for Stormlight 20 years ago.
Yes.
Do you think those stories have become a lot better because you've been working on them for so long?
That's a dangerous thing to think that
you could have done them back then.
No, I mean certainly the pieces of art they are different now than if I'd written them before, and I like what they are now. So I wouldn't change a thing. But I think it's a fallacy to assume that good books are the ones that you slave over for 20 years. Certainly a lot of great books happen that way. But there are fantastic novels written by people who have a spark of genius and just write it and it comes out. The Emperor's Soul, which won the Hugo Award, is one of those stories that I just had an idea and I wrote it. It didn't percolate in me for 20 years. It just happened. And a lot of the famous books you can go read online. And it's very hard for the reader to determine which one was which without knowing beforehand, because sometimes it comes in the moment and sometimes you slave over it.
So Wax and Wayne, do you have fun with those names?
Oh yeah. I named Wayne first, actually.
Was that a John Wayne reference?
No, maybe it was. Maybe it was. I wrote Wayne first as this quirky character who actually, was changing hats and things like this, and that was a short story. That's the one that didn't work. He did not work on his own as a character, and I got a few scenes in, and I thought, nah, this character's just, he needs somebody to play off of. He needs another character. And when I thought of naming that character Wax, it just made me laugh. I'm a fan of bad puns, I guess.
It took me way too long to recognise that. I was like a third of the way through Allo before I was like, wait.
The fun thing is they don't have a moon on Scadril, the planet. Okay. So while the words Wax and Wayne do mean things, the pun of that is not nearly as in the forefront of their minds. No one's meeting them Wax and Wayne and snickering because it's just not connected to them the way it is to us.
Because Wayne is a really fun character as well.
Wayne is a blast.
I love all his jokes.
He's so eccentric and quirky, though, that I really needed somebody for him to bounce off of. When I got the two of them together, their banter was working so well, I knew I had something.
Going back to original Mistborn trilogy, so they didn't know about the kind of time metals?
No, they didn't.
Did the Lord Ruler?
The Lord Ruler knew about all the metals, yes. Okay. He was aware of them.
Do you think things would have gone amazingly differently if Vin and Elend had known about the time travel? Maybe.
The thing about it is they are such unusual metals. They're not metals that were used. Cadmium, it's not something you see showing up in medieval archives very often. And I wanted to leave the magic able to evolve. So maybe, I don't know. People ask, what did the Lord Ruler know? What didn't he know? One thing you have to remember is the Lord Ruler did not really, truly consider Kelsier and the team a credible threat. Yeah. He was much more worried about the house politics and the nobility and building up for a house war so he could, thin those ranks a little bit. And while, the Ska rebellion and things like that was something Lord Ruler is aware of, and his Inquisitors certainly were interested in them, it's not something he considered a legitimate threat to his power. And so, though he knew of certain things that may have changed the books if they had been used, there wasn't really the chance or the reason for him to do so.
When you have aluminium as your inert metal, is that a tinfoil hats joke?
Yeah, it was. The tinfoil hats joke came out of aluminum or aluminium.
Oh, sorry.
Aluminium sounds so much prettier. I'm over here, I should say aluminium. While I had built that in to be the inert metal, when I got to the contemporary ones and I thought, I can make a tinfoil hat joke, I did. But it was reversed. I didn't call it aluminium in the first place in order to have that joke.
Is atium going to come back?
That's what we call a RAFO, which is that's a Robert Jordan term. It means read and find out. He loved using that with fans and pulling it out. I actually feel a little guilty every time I say it. But I don't mean it. I don't mean it rudely. But
as long as you keep me in books for the next 20 years, I'm fine.
You don't have to worry about that. I write pretty compulsively. I love doing this. I tell people. I wrote 13 novels before I sold one. So I wrote almost at the same rate when I was unpublished, just because I loved doing it. So you don't really have to worry. Now that people are giving me ridiculous amounts of money to write these books, you don't have to worry about me stopping.
Yeah, you write insane amounts. I swear you write faster than I can read.
It is not that fast.
How long do you write a day?
I usually do 4 to 5 hour sessions.
Okay.
And I write pretty regularly. 2,000 to 3,000 words is what I try for in a day.
Okay.
It's not that fast. I'm just very consistent. And that's the real kind of blessing that I have. Is
I'll ask you what you're working on now then.
I am working on the 3rd book of the Stormlight Archive.
Brilliant.
And my goal is to finish that sometime summer 2016, and then we can see where the publication happens after that.
Well, I'm counting down for that. Anyway,
Thank
thank
you very
you for
much.
speaking to me. Thank you for speaking
Yep.
to my viewers.
Thank you guys. I really appreciate you reading.
Bye.
Because there's some weird things happening there.
I lived there for 3 years, so
No, nothing weird.
well, not that I can tell muggles about.